Hockey fans, welcome to NYI FYI with Sean Croft and Chris Hessel.
Welcome to NYI FYI. Sean Croft and Chris Hessel here on Sunday, June 29th, 7:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, recapping the 2014 NHL entry draft and how the New York Islanders came away. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
I think
nothing like talking hockey in late June, is there?
No, not at all. Especially when it seems like the Islanders, from what we've heard, and all indications are that this team will be much improved in the next couple of weeks.
We will see, but
we've heard this before, been there, done that.
Off to a good start. Yaroslav Halak,
yes,
who we talked about extensively. We'll get to that when we talk about some of the free agent stuff. But yeah, a little bit cautious optimism, I guess, is what the word I would use going into this off season. I would have been more pessimistic if the Stanley Cup Finals didn't go the way that they did, but
no, they went exactly how they were supposed to go.
Well, I wouldn't say that because I would have preferred
that other team didn't
but that's
win.
Okay. That's okay.
No, you know why I was okay with it going the way that it happened? Because I got to listen to how great 1994 was for like a week leading up to that series, and just watch 1994 and 20 years and it's fate and it's all going to collapse around you, and that's what made it okay.
Oh my gosh. But yes, we are here. We are back.
All that 1994 means is that you haven't won a Stanley Cup in a long time. We're not ones to talk.
No, we're not.
But, I can sit here and I can tell you 35 years since the last cup and the last year in the barn, and so that means we're going to win. No, it doesn't. It means that we're leaving a crappy building and the team's kind of stunk for a long time. That's what that means.
But yes, anyway, not to digress or take away from this discussion, but absolutely, glad to be back and glad that it's under the circumstances that it is in. It was a fun playoffs to watch, though.
Oh, it was
really fun,
and it was great. I'll say this: the benefit to having the Rangers in the Stanley Cup Finals against the LA Kings, it's New York versus Hollywood. So
yeah,
you have
fun.
So many people with a vested interest just because you're watching New York versus Hollywood,
and you're watching one of the best goaltenders perform. Actually, two of the best goaltenders perform, and that's a lot of people. It's like a good pitcher's duel in baseball. You got a good goaltenders battle. There's one thing that we learned from the playoffs. It's that you really want to have good goalies. It all starts from the goal out, and it's amazing how even in the new NHL, it holds that way. And you want to talk about draft? I mean, boy, did the Islanders drop the ball the last several years, really, on their draft. I mean, Mika Koskinen didn't pan out. Anders Nilsson didn't pan out. Kevin Poulin, it doesn't sound like they even want him to be a backup next year. You really have to, there's an importance on getting some good value in goaltenders in the middle rounds. And like I said, you want to talk about draft, you look at where some of these guys came from. It's important to have good scouting, especially when it comes to goaltenders. And that's really an exact science.
Yeah.
And to me, that was one of the big takeaways from these playoffs is, if you don't have a good goaltender, you're going to go nowhere. You can have the best offense, you can have one of the best defenses, but if you don't have that goaltender, that last line, you're not going to get very far or make any kind of noise.
Right. And I thought we did pretty good in the middle rounds with the two goalies we did get.
I thought so too.
Sorokin is, he's a kid playing in a men's league.
He's a kid playing in his men's league. He's played 45 games over the past 2 years.
His stats are forgivable.
Yeah, very talented too. If you've seen any of the film on him, very talented.
Yep.
Very quick reflexes, which to me is impressive for someone at that age. And the other thing that I found impressive is that I was reading an article on him today. He had left home, Sorokin, to go train with the organization that he's with now there, and at 12 years old, and he's still with them, and he's got a contract extension. A lot of goaltenders, especially goaltenders from Europe, don't come over. I mean, he's 19, 18 years old, whatever it is, 19, and even if he comes by at 21, I mean, that's going to be a little ambitious, I think. You get guys that come over from Russia or Europe, for that matter, a little later.
Which is not a bad thing.
Which is not a bad thing.
Goaltenders
are always, take time. I think that it certainly sounds like he has interest in the NHL, and I think that he's very talented. And I know he was ranked pretty highly as far as goaltenders are concerned. I actually like that pick at that spot.
Yeah.
And the Islanders needed to do their due diligence on the goaltenders, because it's at the point where, although now they have Halak for the next 4 years, there is nothing else in this system right now.
No.
And the fact that they're trying to go out and get another backup, and we'll get to that when we talk about the free agency later, tells you all you need to know about where this organization is goaltending-wise. There is absolutely nothing there.
That's right. And it's been like this for a long time.
Right. So I like the Sorokin pick for that.
And I like Soderstrom for 2 reasons. A, it's kind of funny that we're going to see another Soderstrom.
Anytime you can draft a goalie with the name Soderstrom, you have to. I said that on Twitter yesterday. You got to do it, right?
Yeah.
No relation, of course.
I mean, his size. He's 6'4". He's still a kid. He's going to fill in. And they said, as it is right now, he doesn't leave a lot of space in the net because he's so large, and he's only going to fill in further. So
yeah, and
it's funny because you used to see these guys, 5'8", 5'10", 5'11" goaltenders, and those were the guys you coveted. Now they're considered undersized when you see how many 6'4", 6'5", or Ben Bishop 6'7" goaltenders.
Right. And the concern there is, of course, immediately they get, people look at a big goaltender from Sweden, and they immediately think, oh, we just went through that with Anders Nilsson, and he was a bum and stuff like that. The difference between Anders Nilsson and Soderstrom, like you were pointing out, is not leaving a lot of space there. Soderstrom doesn't come out of the net a lot. He's kind of got more of a stand-up thing. The thing that drove us nuts, and we saw it down the stretch last year, when basically the Islanders were telling Anders Nilsson, win your job for next year. This is your chance. Going down soon, leaving a lot of space over the shoulders. And it sounds like that Soderstrom is a little bit of a throwback in that mold, as far as being more of a stand-up guy. And so I think that the Islanders did pretty well goaltending-wise. I like them. A lot of people like the Sorokin pick, and for good reason. Soderstrom, honestly, I'm kind of on the fence about him. I liked the pick when it happened. There were a couple of other European goaltenders that were pretty good around that time. But I think that the Islanders targeted Sorokin. I think that was a good pick. Mm-hmm. And I think that they had several other guys that they liked as far as a second option as goaltender. And I think that this was probably not their first choice, but I think that it's a good talent.
Yeah, ISS didn't have Sorokin on their list of top 20 goalies in the draft. And Soderstrom came in at 19. So certainly far back on that chart, but I think there's still a lot to be seen. Sorokin, it might be a fear that he won't come from Russia. He's still young. He's still raw. Right. His stats stink, but like I said, you forgive the stats because he is a child playing in a men's league.
Right. And you always, with goaltending, it's funny. I always look at the ratings of goaltenders from the scouting services as only interesting, because it is such a difficult thing to peg these goalies, and you look at where all the best ones are coming from. They're coming from the middle rounds. They're not the number one goalies in their draft class. Jonathan Quick wasn't the number one goalie in his draft class. Even if you want a serviceable starter like a James Reimer, another third, fourth round pick, these guys always seem to come out of that's like the sweet spot for goaltenders. I mean, there are some that come out of the first round, the Carey Prices, the Marc-Andre Fleury's, that are actually really good. But overall, it is such a tough thing to, there's a lot of techniques that can be taught to a goaltender that can't necessarily be taught to, a forward defenseman. Some of that natural, born with it talent. You can always work on reaction time. You can always work on, to an extent. But, I think it's easier to develop some of those guys, but you got to get guys that have the right head for it, that have shown something to you in another league. And for me, Sorokin, stats aside, has shown that he can play with men on a team that wasn't that great in the KHL, and has been there in the system for a while, learning, getting better every year, it sounds like, as their backup. So, I actually like that pick. That was probably one of my favorite picks.
I mean, clearly the home run pick, without question, is the 5th overall pick. There were a lot of people, myself included, that wanted to see that pick get traded.
Oh, absolutely.
But it became obvious that there wasn't really a market for that pick. I know Chicago wanted to get into the top 5. Unless we were going to get Charmlison
Right.
or Patrick Sharp. You and I had kind of went back and forth on that. Or even Brendan Saad. Those guys, I guess, were just not going to be available in that that pick.
Yeah, that's not what it looked like.
I've taken the stance that this team doesn't need futures. This team needs players for now. But if you are going to get a future player, if it wasn't going to be Ekblad or Reinhardt, I think the guy that this team really needed and the guy that we came away with was the guy we got, Michael Del Call.
Absolutely.
I think he's the best scorer in this draft as far as having the ability to finish. Left wing, quality left wingers in this league come at a premium. We know that.
Yep.
He's got size. He'll fill in that size. He's just got to work on that skating a little bit. But we said the same thing about John Tavares, and that hasn't proven to be so much of a problem up to this point.
And he's got this, the size that he doesn't use yet, and you would like to see, like you said, maybe as he fills out, maybe he starts throwing his weight around a little bit. That would certainly be nice. Definitely hard to get top-end scorers, though, on the wings, especially left wing. And that's, you want to talk, aside from goaltending, that's the thing that the Islanders lacked. I mean, they're very deep at center. They got a lot of guys that actually do favor the right wing, too, in their organization. They got several in the lineup already as it is.
Yeah.
But they do have several prospects coming up that seem to do better when put on the right wing, and we've seen some of those guys in Bridgeport. But they do better on the right wing than they do with the left side. And I think for me, I everything about Del Cole around him, even the character and stuff like that, it just screamed Islander pick to me. And when there was certainly the possibility that he was going to be there at 5, that was a guy that I said the Islanders have to get this kid. He's a good guy for the organization to have, good guy to build, and certainly excited, and definitely has that exciting top-end skill as far as a finisher goes. So I thought that was a great pick. Obviously, it was kind of a no-brainer at that spot. If Richie or someone had jumped up into that top spot, into that top 4, it would have created some interesting debate for that 5 pick. But once everything kind of went the way that it went,
maybe if Richie jumps in and you're looking at Sam Bennett or Del Call
or even Draisaitl. I know you liked Draisaitl before the year ended. I was a little iffy on him only because of the World Juniors, but you don't want to fall into that trap of looking too much at World Juniors.
Right. If Sam Bennett falls, maybe then the Islanders, it may have been more likely that they could have gotten a team like Chicago.
I was going to say, I think more likely to jump up.
And then we would have walked away with a right now player.
Yeah. Now I saw a lot of people saying that they had to trade that pick no matter what, even if it meant just for Johnny Boychuk and stuff. And
no, you can't trade it for nothing.
Say, I understand. Again, I'm a big proponent of. I'm done with futures. I want to get better now. This team has every incentive to get better now because they don't have that first-round pick next year. And if you got this potential sale looming at some point between now and by the time the season starts or wherever it is, Garth Snow's got to realize that he's battling for his job. So there is incentive for him to also do a good job. So I get the fact of trading picks for help now, but at the same time, A, it wasn't there. And B, right. I wasn't trading the 5th overall pick just to trade the 5th overall pick and get help. That would have been a Milbury-like trade.
Yeah.
Get the asset that can help you a couple of years down the road, will be a part of the team, and you can work on filling what his spot would be in free agency or through trading a future 2nd or a future 3rd, similar to the way that you've gotten James Wisniewski in the past, similar to the way that you've gotten, Lubomir Vishnevsky. Go and find that equivalent down at wing if you can't sign it, and make a trade of a future for that. But that's not going to require a 5th overall pick. Certainly not for a player with a contract that's expiring or is kind of on the wrong side of 30. That's not what the intention is there. The only thing over 30 that I probably would have traded that pick for was Sharp because of the 3 years left.
Right. Our second pick in the first round, it seems to be polarizing. Maybe polarizing because I'm not thrilled with the pick. And I'm in a minority amongst Islander fans, but sort of in a majority amongst a lot of the scouts. While a lot of people say that the Islanders came away with a good player in that spot, a lot of people didn't want to take this Josh Ho-Sang. You had only 18. Now here's the thing, and I'm going to throw this out there because I know that Tim Finn reached out on Twitter and said, "Oh, you're not happy with this pick." Typical. all right, I'm sorry that I offended your client, Tim. I guess you're his agent or something. Here's the thing.
Tim's a good guy.
Yeah, so I got to bust his chops. And it's the first show, in a while, so I got to bust Tim's chops. But the thing is, look, I am entitled to my opinion, as are you. You and I differ on this. So
as is everybody else.
I don't.
But yes, you and I differ on this.
I do not agree with your opinion, but I'm not going to say that you're wrong. Here's my thing with Josh Hosang. This team has a history of bringing enigmas into the locker room. They did it with Wisniewski. We just talked about him. They had Blake Como. They had, right now, I think Josh Bailey's an enigma. I've heard and have seen some evidence that perhaps the off-ice activities are primary to the on-ice activities. I know that when Glow, the nightclub, was open right by the Coliseum, he would be there with Como. And when we traded Como, you and I had kind of said, well, maybe this will help Josh Bailey, kind of how getting rid of Melky Cabrera seemed to help Robinson Cano. But it seems like it hasn't gotten there yet. He tends to be lazy on plays, this, that, and the other thing. This team just has always brought in guys that I always kind of felt maybe weren't the right type of guys. Chris Simon, I think, was the right idea. You had the right idea. You did it with the wrong player. I feel like right now we have a good locker room with classy guys. John Tavares is our Derek Jeter in regards to how respectful he is and how business-oriented he is and how much he loves and respects the game. I think that I have no problem bringing in a player with a chip on his shoulder, a kid that's confident. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do have a problem with a kid that likes to toot his own horn, a kid that likes to talk about how great he is, a kid that was suspended 16 games last season, 15 of which were for an illegal hit. You're getting a 15-game suspension in juniors. Think about that. That's a lot for a hit. He gets suspended an additional game because he's showing up late to practice. A lot of things that he says I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that he's really interested in toning it back because he and his agent love this I'm going to be me mentality, which when I hear that, I think a lot of Johnny Manziel. Now, obviously, their backgrounds are different, but the mentality seems to be the same. That makes me a little bit nervous. I see there being a clash. There's one thing if you're going to be the biggest cheerleader for your team and stand up for your players, and we're not a doormat as we saw the Islanders take that stance a couple of years ago, but if you're going to be arrogant, I see this being an issue with a guy like John Tavares. Tavares is not an arrogant guy. He backs up his play. He backs up his hype with his play, not by running his mouth. And this kid, to me, has every makings of being a Patrick Kane, being a chip-on-the-shoulder type of kid with a little bit of an attitude, but the difference is Patrick Kane was able to dial it back when he had to, and that's why Patrick Kane didn't fall so far back in the first round as this kid did. This kid may have been one of the most skilled players in this draft and fell as far as he did for a reason. He was on do-not-draft lists with a number of teams. The other thing here is, and take it with a grain of salt. There's two sides to every story. I'm not discrediting that. Given our day and age, especially with what just happened with Donald Sterling, and obviously that was a very terrible thing for a franchise that is very similar to our franchise, I believe the Clipper franchise, and the fan base, very similar to this. You're kind of recognized as the secondary team in a big city, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. You just never always seem to get out of that basement. It's a very, very similar. Bad ownership, very similar, although obviously it's clear that Donald Sterling a much worse owner than Charles Wang for so many reasons. When you bring up the fact that you believe that you are discriminated against at all, or you kind of insinuate that, that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, and it's going to bring a lot of sometimes unnecessary drama into a locker room where this is a young locker room. It's an impressionable locker room. These are kids that are still kids. John Tavares is 24 years old. So he's still young. a lot of the guys in this team are in their mid to lower 20s, really still getting accustomed to the league, accustomed to the game, trying to find their own spot. They're playing for a team that everybody thinks is a joke, and they're trying to reinvent themselves without having to reinvent the wheel. And you bring in a kid like this, it's a lot of distraction. It makes me nervous. There's no doubt that this kid is incredibly talented. But Theo Fleury was incredibly talented. Theo Fleury should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Now, obviously, Theo Fleury was his worst enemy, and a lot of his problems were chemically induced. But he was arrogant, and he ran his mouth, and this kid, in my eyes, not that I'm saying he's going to fall into a drug problem like Theo Fleury did, but this kid could be Patrick Kane or he could be Theo Fleury. And if you're taking this kid in the 3rd round, okay, that's worth the risk. Technically, this was 3 draft picks to get this kid. The 2 you gave up in the 2nd move up into the 1st, and then the pick you actually used to take him. When I think that there's a chance you could have had him at 5. Personally, when I heard we traded up, I thought we were going to get Thatcher Demko. It's a kid I like. Playing for Boston College, goaltender, good size. He put up good statistics. We could have had him in that spot as well. I feel that to trade up and get the kid, it's a big risk to take in the 1st round, giving up assets where you talk about being aggressive in the trade market, and those 2 picks, you could have moved them for a 1st next year. You could have moved them for multiple picks next year. You turn them and flip them for a now player in a couple of weeks. It's just a lot riding on that particular pick where, given the kid's track record, there's a lot of risk involved, and I think that it brings unnecessary drama to a club that doesn't need unnecessary drama. Now, if he pans out and I'm wrong, best case scenario, and I hope that's what happens, but there is an inherent risk in taking this kid on. And from what I like the fact that he says, I'm an Islander and I'm going to be an Islander. I'm going to do, in regards to being an Islander, he said all the right things. In my eyes, though, I have not liked a lot of what I've heard from his, out of his mouth. I don't like what I've heard in regards to what a lot of the scouts have said about his mindset. And it's just a big risk taking this kid on, and I don't know that this was the risk that this team needed to take right now.
I understand what you're saying. A lot of talk about distractions in locker rooms. It's a locker room that he's not going to sniff for a few years.
Right.
So he's going to have plenty of time to get over himself if that's what your concern is. I think that it's a good move for the Islanders to kind of show him some love, if you will, in that sense, as, hey, your value is all over the board right now because of things that you have said. Worth noting, of course, things that he said in a Steve Simmons article, those who remember us a few years ago having Steve Simmons on the show the year that John Tavares was drafted, and backtracking from a lot of his comments in an article that he wrote where he said that John Tavares should pull Eric Lindros, thank you, and refuse to play for the franchise. I'm inclined to take anything that he puts, especially with quotes, as far as the context is concerned, with a grain of salt. I don't think we would ever know the true context of some of the comments that were made. Certainly, definitely a lot of people get the Johnny Manziel comparison, and there's reasons for it. There's the same cocky attitude, there's the same outspokenness about him, and people just don't understand me, so people just don't like me, and of course, he had to throw in the idea and make it a little bit of a race thing, and that's not something that you always want to do. And I don't think that he meant anything necessarily bad about it. But the chip on the shoulder, I think, is the angle that gets played up, and I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing, especially when it comes with someone who has high-end skill with that. My biggest gripe with him is the selfishness as far as play on the ice goes. I think he could stand to pass a little bit more. A lot of the problems with him are he likes to create a lot of his offense, and he's good at that, but doesn't use his line mates as much, and that's something that I think what I see in this kid a little bit. I see a little bit of a Nazem Kadri. I really do. If he turns into that, that's phenomenal for us. But I see a lot of the same comments. I see a lot of the chip on the shoulder. And I think for Kadri, the same way that it is for Hosang, is a little bit of a chip that is from something other than play. I think it's from upbringing. I think it's from, in a sense, as odd as it may sound and as cruel as it may sound, it's a different kind of upbringing than most kids have. Honestly, it is. I mean, you're talking about a kid who is coming up from that, and you don't know, is there something there ingrained in his head that, hey, I'm different than the people that I grew up with, and this is why, and I've always been, and if that's the point that he's trying to make of why, of, hey, I've always lived with this chip on my shoulder because of this, and that, and it plays a factor for somebody like that. But I'm not going to get bent out of shape over a 17, 18-year-old making these comments and saying these things, because you know what? Honestly, in some cases, he may actually be right. I hate to say that, but in some cases, he may actually be right. As far as that goes, though, it's not the angle to play up. It's more likely that it's not the case. Anytime you're dealing with a player that's polarizing like that, it is a tough thing. There's no way in heck this kid would have lasted to the third round, and it's just, it wasn't happening. A lot of people talked about Kirill Kabanov, Kirill Petrov, and risks like that falling to the third round when they did a few years ago. It was Teverdin from Detroit falling to the fourth round. And for me, a lot of it is just other issues. There's for those guys, it was, are they going to go run back home? Is the KHL factor? Is there this, that, and the other thing? That's not a risk with this kid. The risk here is, does he speak too much? And you know what? Yeah, he probably does speak too much. The suspensions and stuff that he got, yeah, some of it, it's not good stuff. Showing up late to practice is not good stuff. But I don't think we're dealing with a head case as in the sense of like a Kyle Beach, which is a guy that a lot of people liked, but a lot of people didn't like. And it always came back to, how is his on-ice skill? And the answer was, I don't think it's all that good. And we're still waiting for him to make the NHL. Now he's with the New York Rangers organization, of course. There's no denying Josh Ho-Sang's skill. The skill is there. Playing on a pretty bad team last year too in juniors. I think that it wasn't a good situation for a lot of people, himself included. I mean, 2 years ago you were hearing a lot about this kid, and now all of a sudden, yeah, his stock takes a hit. I really doubt that he even would have lasted to 35, in my opinion. I really don't know if I would have seen Buffalo or Florida passing on him early in that first round. And for me, I thought for a late first-round pick in a draft year that is just kind of average or a little bit below average as compared to most, I didn't have a problem with it. You're packaging those two picks up. The preference would have been to move those for something now. You weren't going to get that. I have no problem moving that up for kind of a home run swing, a very talented guy who, let's face it, this kid has a very good shot at making the NHL. This kid, if he doesn't, it's because he says something stupid or gets into legal trouble. None of which I've seen as an indication through his words and stuff. I don't see that from him. I just see a kid who's a little bit immature and has said things that he probably regrets in some cases. But I see a kid who's sincere when he says, and he said it to E.J. Radick again the other day, I think I say things and I'm outspoken. I think that's where a lot of people's problems is. But I think a lot of people mistake it, when it's really my confidence. And I saw some people even picking on the fact that he said he would pick himself first, that he didn't show humility as a draft prospect. If you're an NHL draft prospect, I don't care where people have you going. If you don't walk into a room saying, I'm a good hockey player and I deserve to be drafted in the first round by an NHL team, I don't know. I would question you at that point, because I think if you're good enough to be considered one of the best 200 players in the NHL to get in hockey right now, to get drafted by an organization, you absolutely should hold your head high and walk around with that aura of, I deserve to be a first-round pick. And let me make the arguments why. Time will tell how he goes, and the Theo Fleury comparison is yes and no. I don't think that this kid was abused as a child. And that's a big problem. And a lot of that caused the chemical problems, and I kind of feel for Theo Fleury in that sense of that's where a lot of the problems were. And for somebody like that, it was hard to get over, and I don't think that Josh Ho-Sang's going to have much problems getting over, the stuff that goes on in his mind. If anything, it'll be similar to like what we see with guys like Milan Lucic, guys that, if that's what it is, I think that that'll be the worst that you see out of a guy like this. I don't see any legal problems. I don't see any problems affecting his on-ice play because of them. Like I said, if there's any downfall for him as far as hockey is concerned, it'll be the fact that he's a little bit of a selfish player and needs to use his line mates more. But some of the other stuff in the background, I love this pick for the fact that he has that ability to be the best offensive player in this draft, and then he wants to do that, and then he bought into the whole Islander thing already about us against the world, and he went into this draft knowing that it was us, that it was me against the world, that article didn't paint him in a good light, and I'm not scared away by the fact that some people had him on their do not draft list. I think I trust our organization as far as drafting prospects is concerned. I trust Anaheim's organization as far as drafting prospects is concerned. I trust Detroit's organization, and they've taken some head cases, and it's worked out for them. Anaheim, so for me, I liked the pick, and I don't get as affected by that stuff, but it's perfectly legitimate. You brought up good points.
Yeah. Pablo says, not happy about Garth's interview and the comments on TSN. To me, it's a joke and not a rally cry. Obviously, Garth went on TSN after the pick and first on air. And
you know what? And basically said, if they're going to dump on him, they've been dumping on me too. With reason, they've been dumping on you, Garth.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't have made a comment like that unless I would have shown some more success.
Right.
Right now it looks kind of silly. If he had gone and made trades before this draft, and if he had gone and traded for more rights and signed those guys and was ready for prime time, absolutely. The fact of the matter is you're trying to negotiate. You've been negotiating with free agents as the draft approaches, and you're making a comment like that. You had already traded for Dan Boyle's rights, and he wouldn't sign with you. Just because a goaltender signed with you when he didn't have as many options to begin with and probably did the smart thing in signing with you, you think that changes the perception around? I don't think so.
Moxie.
Unless he is super confident from those interviews that he's going to sign some of these top free agents, and that's what makes him make a comment like that. I have absolutely no idea why he would say something like that. It was funny for what it was at the time, but the more you think about it, the more you go, what is this guy really doing?
Right.
And why would he say something like that when we don't
drafted
know what's
John
going on here?
Tavares.
Because right now it looks like Michael Del Cole may have to be the top line winger next year unless you can go out, back up the truck, and sign one of these top winger free agents.
That's right. You drafted John Tavares. Anybody could have drafted John Tavares. I could have drafted John Tavares. You could have drafted John Tavares. Anybody could have drafted John Tavares.
Yeah, so you
go out and you get Halak. Yeah, that's a big need, and good for you. You did it, but
I would have saved that comment for when I was signing.
It's not like you signed Lundqvist. You signed Yaroslav Halak.
I would have saved that comment for when I'm signing some of the top names on free agent. Like, hey, we're for real now. And,
I tell you what. Tuesday night, if you show me Thomas Vanek, Matt Niskanen, and you or it's Matt Niskanen and God help us, Brad Richards, and you traded Franz Nielsen and a pick and maybe Pulak, and you brought in a stud left wing, then you make those types of comments.
Yeah, if you have
but until you do that, you can't make those types of comments.
If you have a team with a top four that's not cringeworthy, then you can make those comments, because then you can say, well, we got a good goaltender, we got a good defense now, we already had a good offense, and now we're even better because we signed X and Y for it. We're ready for prime time, and whatever else and things like that. And but the fact of the matter that you waited to make that comment, or you made that comment on a draft pick after a draft pick that's got a history, and you really haven't done anything besides just go out and get this goaltender. That's great, but at the same time there's a concern because Yaroslav Halak's had these great numbers when he's been facing 23 shots a game. I love Yaroslav Halak. It was going to be my top choice on the market this offseason because of, aside from the stats, but because of the age and the value for the contract. But, the limited times we've seen him in Montreal and the 12 games in Washington when he's faced 30 shots, he's looked great. But how long is he going to hold up with that? The Islanders only had a top four defenseman. It's going to look foolish. Those comments are going to look even more foolish. People are going to, because now it's just more cannon fodder.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
We'll bring up these other three kids quickly, or the two kids, but there's not much to say here. We got Lucas Sutter.
Yeah, Lucas Sutter in the 7th round.
Right, he was a second-round pick, didn't sign with Winnipeg, re-enters, we get him late. Okay, obviously he's got second-round talent, just didn't sign with the Jets, so we'll see what happens there. He's a Sutter, so, there's obviously pedigree there.
And then there were Taze and Shemp, Devon Taze, and defenseman from Quinnipiac.
Very offensive-minded and does not really have a defensive game to him.
No,
But he's young.
A small guy. He's
Right.
young. And Shem. I mean, these are kids, that the kind of
We're lucky
all
if
over
we
the
ever
map.
see him.
They're kind of all over the map. The fourth and the fifth and the sixth round picks. The only one after Sorokin and I guess Soderstrom that really intrigued me was Sutter. Only because of the fact that he was a second-round pick, his numbers took a hit. Then he had that major shoulder surgery, and for me, when I look at him, I say, well, maybe there's something there, And the fact that he's got the bloodlines makes you kind of feel good about it. Like, oh, maybe he'll battle, maybe he'll pull through, maybe he'll get his offensive game back, maybe stuff like that. That's really the only intriguing pick to me of the other ones. I mean, Taves and Schemper, listen, Taves was okay. His numbers weren't great with Quinnipiac, but you hope they pan out. But I think that especially in the case of him, with the other kind of smaller defensemen that the Islanders have, there's some doubts of given with the Islanders who drafted in the past years and a lot of the defensemen that they've already signed. They right now they stand to have a lineup in the AHL, defensive lineup in the AHL of all kids that they've drafted over the past couple of years, which can actually work out really well for them or be really bad, because there's not going to be a lot of veteran support down in Bridgeport for these guys, and it'll be interesting to see how they kind of go through with that.
Yeah.
But it looks like we may actually see Sutter in a chance to see him in the AHL.
Pablo in the chat room. Any UFA that the Isles look at, I'm afraid that Florida and Buffalo will be competing with us as they bought out large contracts to get to the floor. I'm not confident about this UFA period. The two things to keep in mind here, in my opinion, are Buffalo, for one, typically does not go for the big, sexy free agent. They did it with Ehrhoff. They didn't believe it
Leno
worked.
at the time.
They did it with Leno, but
why?
It's
I have
not,
no idea.
Right, and Leno, it made no sense when they did it. That's not a franchise that is going to go out and spend a ton of money typically to go out and get the biggest free agent out there, especially with them being in a rebuild. And they don't know what they are right now. There's talks that they might trade Anthony Stewart again.
Yeah,
they don't know what they are. So I'm not so concerned with Buffalo and the Florida Panthers. Anytime they've gone out and spent a bunch of money, within a year they're trading those guys or releasing them or buying them out anyway. So that's another team I'm not all that concerned with.
Those two teams seem to do a lot with. I mean, Florida has a lot of kids that they want to make some space for, and honestly, Jovanovski was a lot of times a non-factor for them. This guy was off the ice more than he was on the ice since he signed that contract, and that was always the risk that you were getting with Ed Jovanovski. Ever since he left Vancouver and went to Phoenix, that was always his thing. He was always hurt. He was great leader, put up points, this and that, but his game is nowhere near where it used to be. So Florida buying him out, it doesn't really, I don't see a lot there. You have to remember, while they're shedding money that they had last year, they also have a full-time contract that they didn't have last year in Roberto Luongo.
Right.
And that's a big thing for them. They're going to have a backup goalie, which, I don't know who it'll end up being. I mean, they finished the year with Ellis last year after trading Tim Thomas for him. You're going to wonder what are they going to end up doing. If they ended up signing a veteran backup, for $1.5 million, they'll have no problems. Buffalo's the one that I would be more concerned with, only because they do have to get to the floor. But my thinking is they got a lot of assets, and they'd probably be willing to take on somebody's contract problems.
Right.
And Bob McKenzie actually brought up the point that they may actually do that and buy those problems out on a regular buyout and use that to get to the floor the next few years. You take somebody who's got a 2-year contract and you buy them out and take a cap hit over 4 years. Well, that's perfect for them because that's exactly what they're looking to do. They're going through this with thinking that it's probably a 4 or 5 year rebuilding thing before they start to see the fruits of it. The Ehrhoff buyout is a compliance buyout, so they're paying a lot of money to a guy to go away and not having a count against the cap.
And in that case, it makes a lot of sense for them.
And for them, it makes a lot of sense because then they can either get somebody who they can actually use to fill out a roster, or they can go and get somebody that they can use another buyout on, a real buyout, and get what's going to probably amount to a larger cap hit from a team.
Right.
So when I look at Buffalo,
not something over the top for so long like they would with Ehrhoff.
Right. Exactly. So for me, Ehrhoff's that's 14 years, I think, because that's a 7-year. He had 7 years left. They're not going to go out and trade for somebody like that, but they may trade for a guy who's got 2 years left on a big deal that just the team, whatever team, got to get out of.
Could be
I
Hossa.
just can't. Could be something like that. I mean, he's still got like 8 years left, but it could be somebody like that. I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying a veteran
Right.
guy, that type of,
Right.
you know.
Right. Actually, they probably would have traded for like a Marty Havlat. The problem is you got a lot of guys with no trade clauses that won't go there.
Right.
Probably just to be
Right.
A, bought out, or B, just toil and get traded again at some point when their unrestricted free agents free agency is coming up on them. But yeah, you know, Buffalo is definitely a little bit of a pain, I think, because I think that they do have some. On the outside, it looks like they have some money that they have to spend, and some that you would think that they may be willing to spend. But you know, if you believe what they're building there, and what Murray says, you know, I'm not looking to turn this around overnight, no quick fixes type of thing.
The other thing to keep in mind is if you're a free agent and you've got the Florida Panthers, the New York Islanders, and the Buffalo Sabres offering contract, unbiased, let's be real about this. The Buffalo Sabres are the ground floor of a rebuild, which takes between 3 and 5 years.
For some players, they like to see that.
Some do, but a lot of them want to be winning. So there's that. So I think that eliminates Buffalo. Now you're left with the Islanders and the Florida Panthers. You've obviously got a great goaltender in Florida. It's Miami. There's a sexiness to it, but there's a lot of talk about how bad the fan base is, and the other, which doesn't scare me that much because people say we're a bad fan base. The thing that makes me nervous with
Buffalo's
the Florida Panthers,
best fan base of the three.
Yeah, of the three, absolutely. The thing that makes me nervous if I'm a player going to the Florida Panthers is how often do the Florida Panthers sign players to a contract and it doesn't work in that first year, and you're bought out, you're released, you're traded, you're this, you're that. There's a lot of instability. So now you're left with the Islanders, who they're going into a Barclays Center. They're, technically speaking, at least we should be at the end of a rebuild. We went to the playoffs a year and a half ago. If you're a player that thinks that you can go to a team and contribute, get somewhere sooner rather than later, of the three teams, this is probably the better option for you.
Yeah, you know, listen, when the Islanders signed Bill Guerin that year, I mean, he came with all his friends, Mike Comrie, Ruslan Fedotenko. But, you know, the Islanders had made the playoffs. It was a little bit different. But they signed Bill Guerin to that 2-year contract worth $4.5 million a year. Buffalo may find a guy who kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and they'll give him a $4 million contract, which is an overpayment for them, but they won't care type of thing. He'll be a veteran for them. He'll put up points, and they'll go out and they'll get, you know, whatever they can for him at the deadline. There are some players that would sign a longer-term contract on a bad team. Matt Molson's kind of done it for his whole career and always talked about, listen, it was tough and I didn't mind it, you know, going through it. He was a little upset that when the time came to try and move on, that the Islanders decided he wasn't a type of player that you would want to have on a winning team. But, you know, he's done it before, and in the past when he was re-signing with the Islanders, those longer-term contracts, he was saying, you know, I understand what a lot of people, this, that, the other thing, but I enjoy it here. You know, we're trying to build something. So you can get players through free agency that are in the prime of their career, and like, hey, I like trying to build something here. Let's go out and do it. Let's try and prove everybody wrong. And usually it doesn't always work out, you know. But Buffalo is actually, you know, it is a nice place to live. They do have a good hockey fan base, and it's kind of funny because all the years that Colorado has been bad, they still signed some of the top guys. They signed Parenta. They signed Jan Hayda. You know, so for a team like that, you know, I like Buffalo's situation, I think that they won't have any problem signing some of the guys that they do want to go after, because, you know, you're always going to find guys that look at a situation and say, well, it's a nice place to live. It's a team with some good young players. It's, you know, they are not as far off as like where Colorado was, although when some of those guys came on, they didn't necessarily have Nate McKinnon at the time. You know, Buffalo is obviously kind of going for McDavid next year. So there is some, for guys that want to win, there is some apprehension there. And if you know, every comment that comes out from guys when they get traded or signed somewhere, we saw it with Kessler the other day, at the end of the day, I want to win. You know, and that's something that's difficult for either Florida, the Islanders, or Buffalo to provide to them. You know, until you show them otherwise, these teams are always losing, unfortunately.
Right.
And we're lumped in with that. And I think that that's where the Dan Boyle thing, I liked it as an aggressive move, but you knew that there was not a good shot of signing him only because you would have to take him away from the Detroits, the Bostons, the New York Rangers. I use Boston as an example. They don't have the cap space, but
that type of team.
Neither do the Rangers. But that kind of a team, especially Detroit, that needs a right-handed shot, defenseman, puck.
And if you're over the age of 38, Detroit's the place for you.
Right. But because they're always making the playoffs, though.
Right.
And that's what I mean. We joke around about it and stuff like that. But you know what? A team that wins and has a bad building like them always finds a way to be a destination that players want to go to. The Islanders aren't there yet. The Islanders went out and got the goalie, but it's not just magically somebody's going to look at the roster and go, you know what? That Yaroslav Halak move was really great for the Islanders. This team's going to win next year.
Right.
No. You're going to have to convince people why it's a good idea to sign. You're going to have to convince your owner to give you the money to sign and overpay for some of these guys. And that's the position that the Islanders are in.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in a very, that's the position that they're in, that Buffalo and Florida, not necessarily Florida are in, I should say, because Florida kind of wants to make some noise and kind of get things back on track. But Florida also has some pieces that they can move and get some valuable assets for.
Right.
The Islanders don't really want to do any of that. Why, I don't know, but they have some extra defensemen that they probably should look at moving to get help.
Yeah.
If they're not going to go out and sign some of these guys.
I agree. Well, let's talk quickly here.
So we could talk about it now.
Yeah. I mean, this will be quick because, frankly, we still don't know who's going to be a free agent and who's not. We're still hearing on the buyouts.
You had the one bombshell today with Christian Ehrhoff.
Right. Now, Havlat, right before we come on. Havlat.
And Christian Ehrhoff has become the second best defenseman on the market all of a sudden.
Right now, as per Chris Botta, the Islanders have already supposedly reached out to Brad Richards and to Matt Niskanen.
Yeah, I would think it was Staple who said that.
It
was Staple who reported it. And then you had Katie Strang reported Justin Peters as far as backup goalie is concerned.
I'm assuming that if we're talking to Brad Richards, it means that we probably are looking to move Nielsen.
See, that's something that I differ from most people on because I think that he'd be better off at wing. And I think that the Islanders may be looking at him as a wing. Remember, before he signed as a free agent with the Rangers, before Mike Modano retired, he was playing wing for Dallas and looked really good. And then he took over the center duties there and didn't look as good.
I mean, look, I think the guy still has something left in the tank.
I do too.
Obviously, he's an upgrade over pretty much anybody we've already got.
And I know that that's a huge minority. It's saying that I think he looks good at the wing for a year or two, for a team that's trying to kind of put pieces in place.
Right, because you don't know what Anders Lee is going to be. You just got this Dal Cole, so you need to buy yourself some time. A Brad Richards type does that.
I mean, my preference is spending the money on Mike Camilleri.
I would love to have Camilleri. Right now, as far as wingers go, he's on the top of my list. Mike Camilleri. Now, would he want to come here?
That's
you
the
don't
question.
know.
The only good thing you have with
you got John Tavares,
right? But the only thing you have with that too is that he's had a history of being the scapegoat and the guy who is blamed for for teams being bad when it's probably not always his fault, type of thing. And I think that he's would look at the situation and say, well, that's a team that I'll come in and now help, and I'll say to basically everybody, hey, you're the ones who said that I was a guy on the bad team, Montreal and Calgary and LA way back when, and well, here I am now helping the team be good. So explain that to me.
Right.
But it's the Niskanen thing was great. Calling Matt Niskanen being one. It sounds like the Islanders have been very aggressive in this interview period. Now the Islanders are usually aggressive, so that doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy.
Well, the fact though. What gives me the warm and fuzzy is the fact that everybody's talking about how aggressive the Islanders have been. The fact that we were aggressive, we got Halak. We were aggressive, we didn't sign Boyle, but we at least had his rights. This is the most aggression we've seen out of this team in a long time, and I've kind of said to you that I wonder under what ownership is this happening. Nothing is official, but it sounds like the deal's more but done, and you're just waiting for an announcement. We don't know when it's going to come, but obviously somebody is pulling the strings on this, and Garth Snow is listening to somebody, and I have a problem believing that that person is Charles Wang.
I don't know about that, because I think Garth Snow is listening to Garth Snow, because I think he wants to stay. I think it's a very real possibility that Charles is out the door soon, and I think that he wants to stay and realizes that he hasn't done a heck of a lot over his 7, almost 8 years to warrant staying, so he's got to get his butt in gear to kind of show some progress here and be a guy who stays long term. The Islanders reshuffling their offices the way they did, make no mistake, it kind of, in my opinion, takes some of the blood off of Doug Waite's hands and doesn't ruin his long-term standing with the league. Goes from, he's assistant GM now, when the team, in theory, if they do what they expect to do, will be better. He'll be the assistant GM for that.
Yeah.
And then he can either go on with the Islanders and either get promoted if they were going to go in that direction, or go to another team and still be. Garth Snow, if things keep going the way that they have gone, Garth Snow won't get another job in the National Hockey League.
Not as a general manager.
Not as a general manager. I'm not sure if on somebody's staff. I'm sure somebody may scoop him up eventually at some point, but he could be a president for somebody or a director of player development or something, but it's going to be hard for him to get another job, let's be honest. Jack Capuano, it's going to be hard for him to get another job. So
Jack Capuano won't get another job. Forget hard. He's not going to get another job.
So I think when you look at Garth Snow's position here, he realizes that he's got to do what he has to do, and he's got to make that business case. That's part of his job. He's got to make that business case to his owner, whoever it is. Right now, it's Charles Wong to say, you give me the money for this player, and this is what it's gonna mean for our team. And you got to convince him of that. Why it's good to pay more money up front. Why it's good to do what it is. And the scary thought for me is that I'm looking at, Brad Richards would not have been one of the first guys I would have called at free agency. And that is a scary thought. Vanek will be out there again, and we know that the Islanders liked him. Snow doesn't usually negotiate with terrorists, if you will, guys who have turned him down. Listen, at the draft the other day, Staple said that he was talking to Dan Boyle's agent, and all of a sudden he was getting another call from Garth Snow. So it's good to see that he is being aggressive, but going to players and calling them every 5 minutes and saying, how you doing with that decision? We really wanted you to play here. He's not going to do it. You got to basically get in their ear, and you got to tell them why they need to come here. You got to tell them why this is going to be good. You got to tell them what your contingent plan is. If you don't land X, I want to add X, Y, and Z. You're X. If I don't land Y, but I land Z, this is my contingency. That's what teams do.
And the nice thing about them being aggressive is, let's just call it Vanek, because I think Vanek now can be had. It certainly
obviously looks like it. If the Islanders want him and they're still willing to kind of offer a decent-sized contract, that he could be there.
Right, and they can say to him, look, you loved playing with Tavares. You loved playing with Oppozo. Look, we went out and got Yaroslav Halak. We worked on that. We've pitched Matt Niskanen. If we can't get Matt Niskanen, then we're going to go to Christian Ehrhoff. If we can't get him, then we're going to get Anton Stroman. There are a lot of good defensemen out there, and the Islanders have shown, and they'll say, we didn't get Dan Boyle, but we tried, okay? So we know what we're going to do here, so we're going after this guy. There are a lot of contingency plans, and it could be swung as, hey, you sign here, that legitimizes us. One of these guys might be more likely to come once you're here.
And that's the general manager's job. And that's what general managers do when they fly across the country to meet with so-and-so's agent and have this and that, and they show them PowerPoint presentations. That's what their job is supposed to be. So when people say Garth Snow called me and he's one of the most persistent general managers, I don't care about that. If Garth Snow doesn't call you the first time and then set up a meeting the second time and come with a nice presentation about why it's a good idea to sign with the New York Islanders, you're not going to get anybody. If you're a bad team, and the Islanders, let's face it, have been a bad team, forget about a 48-year making the playoffs after a 48-game season. You need to legitimize yourself through your actions, through your words. Say, this is why we're trying to be a winning team. Now, it's a tough sell. It's still a tough sell.
So as we're wrapping this up here, because we're going to wrap this up in a couple of minutes. Who do you have on your wish list? Give me like your top 3 for winger, center, or we'll call it forward, defense. Let's just go forward and defense because there's not a lot out there in goalie.
Well, we know all the backup options. We'll mention them, but it's tough. I mean, I'll start with defense. Okay, I'm going to start with defense. I'm a big proponent of overpaying for Matt Niskanen. I really am. A lot of people don't think he's worth it. He's not worth it. He's not a top 2, but he's a legitimate top 4 who was 27 and in the prime of his career. And that's a guy that you want to have on your team. I like the fact that Willie Mitchell is out there. But again, he probably is not going to come out east, and he's probably looking for the opportunity to win some more cups at the end of his tenure. I liked the Dan Boyle idea. I'm not thrilled about having kind of these 2 older guys on the defense, but Stroman's a guy I like. Anton Stroman's a guy I like, and another guy that I like that's getting some talk, but is probably more a realistic target for the Islanders is Tom Gilbert. And people remember last year I wanted Tom Gilbert on this team on a camp tryout, and he's going to get a decent contract, and I can see the Islanders being a team that would give Tom Gilbert that kind of a contract that some other teams may shy away from only because of one good year. You know, so I gave you 3 names there already, but you know, for me, I'd like to think that the Islanders could land a top guy like a Niskanen or an Ehrhoff or a Strawman, but I really don't know if I see it. I think a guy like a Gilbert is a more realistic option. You know, it depends on what the Islanders are willing to pay for, and you know, I don't know. At forward, you know, it's tough to come up with a wish list because my wish list is obviously, you just name some of the top guys. But when I look at realistic options for the Islanders, I certainly think Ales Hemsky is a realistic option for this team. I certainly think that when people talk about Marty Havlat, you know, after getting bought out, you know, I think he's a realistic option for this Islanders team. You know, especially, you know, half putting up whatever it was, 25 points in the limited games that he played last year, the 40-some-odd games. You know, he can still produce at a 55-60 clip. Always hurt though, but you know, if the Islanders go back to their low-risk, high-reward ways, that can certainly be an option. My number one target, believe it or not, on this market would be Radim Vrbata. Radim Vrbata would be he's my favorite offensive target on this, as far as this goes. I'm not as willing to overpay him as I am to overpay Mike Camilleri, but as far as a body of work and a player that I've liked for a long time and I think can really do well in the system that the Islanders are attempting to play, Radim Vrbata is my favorite offensive target.
Okay.
What about you?
Well, let's just go off the offense here. Only because I can't remember and this computer just died. Is Mason Raymond still available?
Mason Raymond is still available.
Well, all right. So Mason Raymond obviously is on my list. He's not on the top of my list, but I would put him there. He's a guy I wanted the Islanders to go out and get last year. They didn't. He showed us why we should have gotten him. I think Mason Raymond would be a nice fit here. I think you put him on a line with Tavares and Opozo. I think you're easily looking at 50 points. That's a big improvement over the nothing that we have. Frankly, I'm in the minority that would still like to see Thomas Vanek come back. So I guess right now my top 3 it would be Vanek, because you know they have the chemistry, the 3 of them. And I'm not saying that this is who I think they're going to do, but for me, the 3 guys I would like to see them pursue are Vanek, Camilleri, and Mason Raymond. Camilleri, we know what he can do. Mason Raymond, we've seen the best of Mason Raymond. You know, when he played on a very skilled team in Vancouver, he put up some fantastic numbers. I see him doing that with John Tavares. I see him doing that with Kyle Opozo because Kyle Opozo showed that he had a very good year. And he continued to produce points without John Tavares. Obviously, he wasn't going to do it without Tavares and without Vanek, and he was kind of battling the injury. But keep in mind, this isn't just about filling in a spot at left wing. It's about making Kyle Opozo better. And we saw how good Kyle Opozo can be. So those are the 3 guys. Hemsky, Rabada, good options. But for me, the 3 guys I would look at paramount are Camilleri, Vanek, Camilleri, and Mason Raymond.
I don't necessarily want Hemsky, but I just think that that's an Islander. You know, it's a guy that the Islanders can get on a longer-term contract that would be, I think, willing to come and play here. My fear is getting too excited about some of the top names, and now, you know, still fresh in my mind is a few years ago when we needed that top 4 defense, just like we still do now. They went out and tried to get Ehrhoff. They didn't sign him, and
but we could have. That was the problem.
They solved the problem by trading for Brian Rolston and bringing in Steve Stajos on a training camp invite. And that's what this team needs to move away from. Last year, they called Nathan Horton. They didn't get him, so they went to Pierre-Marc Bouchard. And that's what this team needs to walk away from. They don't need to sign David Booth.
Right.
They don't need to sign Ville Leno. This team needs to try and go out and get one of those guys. Interesting names that you brought up.
Yeah, and as far as the defense goes, Niskanen's
the guy for me.
The guy.
I would overpay him. I would give him the Brian Campbell contract.
Yes.
It's going to be an ugly contract, but I think that for the Islanders it'd fit in. I think it really would.
Niskanen, Ehrhoff, and Strawman.
And I'm going with you there. A lot of people make a big deal about his numbers this year as being a product of the system, but you know what? This guy, when he first came up with Dallas, was putting up some decent numbers. kind of struggled in the year that he was traded and went to Pittsburgh. And when you're playing behind Paul Martin at the time, who was putting up the offensive numbers, and Chris Letang, you're not going to get many offensive opportunities, and that's why his numbers took a dip, in my opinion. I think that he is capable of those offensive numbers, but we'll see. And the backup goaltender, Thomas Greiss, I'd love to have. Young guy, you know, I'd take Al Montoya back. I know they're talking to Justin Peters. I'd accept him. I'm afraid of guys like Ray Emery, so if they don't end up with a guy like that, you know, I'm more of a proponent of a younger Chris, you know, Chad Johnson. I'm more in that kind of realm, which I think is kind of what everybody is.
Yeah, that's the consensus. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. It was nice to be back. It was nice to do a show, nice to talk about hockey. Free agency opening on July 1st, so make sure you keep it on the NYIFYI blog, of course, NYIFYI.com, NYIFYI on Twitter. Twitter probably would be the best option because obviously it's the quickest of the Facebook page, and I'm sure that in the next week or so we're going to figure out a time to get back on, and hopefully we're talking about some nice new toys for John Tavares and all the other guys. For Chris Hessel, I'm Sean Croft. We're all Islanders, and we'll see you guys soon.